Through the centuries, kings and emperors have been remembered for their conquests, their power, and their legacies. Yet some rulers are remembered not for glory, but for scandal. Their lust shook thrones, destroyed reputations, and left behind unforgettable tales. This is the story of the three most lustful rulers in history. In the scorching summer of 1936, Egypt crowned a new monarch. He was not yet 20 years old, a boy king stepping into the shoes of giants, a descendant of the proud Muhammad Ali dynasty that had ruled the nation for over a century. His name was Farouk, and he became the 10th ruler of that dynasty and the last king of Egypt. When he first ascended the throne, the people saw in him a promise of renewal. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and strikingly handsome. His smile disarmed critics. His voice carried confidence, and in his youth many saw the potential for a golden age. Newspapers placed his photograph on their front pages, shopkeepers hung his portrait above their counters, and the crowds who cheered him in the streets whispered that perhaps Egypt had finally found a leader who could match the greatness of its ancient pharaohs. But beneath the polished surface of the young king was a restless hunger. At first it was hidden, glimpsed only by those closest to him. Yet as the months passed, his appetites began to shape the rhythms of his life. The palace became less a place of rule and more a theatre of indulgence. Nights in the royal court were filled with the clatter of silver trays, the aroma of roasted lamb and sweet pastries dripping with honey, and the heavy perfumes of imported wines. Farouk would sit at the head of long banquet tables, laughing and feasting, devouring one course after another while music played, and servants rushed to satisfy his every whim. His weight grew quickly, but even as his body thickened and his features softened with fat, his hunger did not diminish. Food was only the beginning. Farouk's true addiction was women. From the earliest days of his reign, whispers drifted through the corridors of the palace. Singers, dancers, aristocratic daughters, and married women were summoned at his command. Some came willingly, enticed by the promise of jewels and luxury. Others came because refusal was unthinkable. He made little effort to conceal his conquests. At public events he appeared with different women draped on his arm, as if the throne of Egypt were a stage, and he the leading man in an endless play of desire. Cairo in the 1930s was alive with music, cinema, and the glamour of nightlife, and Farouk immersed himself fully. He would slip into the city in disguise, though everyone knew who he was, and enter the nightclubs where the air was thick with smoke and the sound of jazz drifted above the chatter. Behind velvet curtains, he drank heavily, gambled recklessly, and surrounded himself with women whose laughter echoed long after dawn. His presence was magnetic, arrogant, insatiable. Foreign correspondents soon picked up the stories and began to call him the Playboy King, a monarch more interested in seduction and scandal than in governance or reform. Farouk did not pursue women for love or companionship. For him, desire was a form of possession. Every conquest was another jewel in his crown, another trophy to be admired and then discarded. Rumors spread that he kept a secret list of his lovers, a tally of his conquests. Whether such a record truly existed did not matter. The mere suggestion added to his legend. Women entered his life in a blaze of attention and luxury, only to vanish when he grew bored, their reputations ruined, and their futures diminished. The king's appetites extended far beyond the bedroom. He was an obsessive collector. Cars filled his garages, jewels overflowed from chests, rare stamps and gold coins piled up in secret rooms. He was even accused of stealing small treasures from foreign dignitaries, slipping jeweled cigarette cases or expensive watches into his pockets, as if the wealth of Egypt were not already his to command. His greed became inseparable from his lust. Just as he consumed women, he consumed objects, devouring everything he touched in an endless cycle of acquisition. But indulgence breeds fear. Farouk trusted no one. He filled his palace with spies who monitored not only his ministers and generals but also his lovers. Every conversation was noted, every movement reported. He demanded loyalty, yet offered none in return. Even as he drowned in excess, he suspected betrayal everywhere in his court, in the army, even in the streets of Cairo. But he was blind to the true betrayal, the growing anger of his people who watched their king waste fortunes while they lived in poverty. By the 1940s, the dream of a golden reign had rotted into scandal. While the world burned in the Second World War, Farouk burned through his nights in casinos and brothels. His once majestic figure ballooned into grotesque obesity, his handsome face lost beneath layers of fat, his clothes struggling to contain his body. Egyptians who once adored him now mocked him, calling him gluttonous and corrupt. Foreign newspapers printed humiliating stories of his escapades. His very name became a punchline, a symbol of wasted promise. The tension in Egypt grew unbearable. Nationalists demanded independence from British influence, the poor rioted for bread, and the army seethed with resentment. Yet the king continued to live in a fantasy world of indulgence. He seemed oblivious to the storm gathering outside his palace walls. In July of 1952, the storm arrived. The Free Officers Movement, a group of young military men, rose against him. Tanks surrounded his palace. Soldiers filled the streets. The boy king, who had once been hailed as the savior of Egypt, was trapped, not by foreign invaders, but by his own people. In a moment heavy with history, Farouk abdicated the throne. The last king of Egypt boarded a ship into exile, leaving behind the land of his ancestors forever. In Italy, he lived as he always had. Rome's casinos and restaurants became his new palaces. He waddled through the gaming tables, dressed in ill-fitting suits, his body grotesquely swollen, his fingers heavy with rings. Prostitutes and mistresses clung to him, but no longer out of admiration. Now he was a curiosity, a fallen monarch whose crown had slipped into scandal. The same appetites that had ruined him in Egypt consumed him still. He ate with reckless abandon, gambled away fortunes, and pursued women with desperation, as if afraid that without them he would cease to exist. But the years were unkind. His health collapsed under the weight of decades of gluttony and lust. He wheezed with every step, sweated constantly, and lived in the shadow of the man he once had been. No longer did the world see a modern pharaoh. They saw only a tragic figure, pathetic and pitied. On the 18th of March, 1965, Farouk dined in a Roman restaurant. The table groaned beneath the weight of food. Roasted meats, heavy pastas, sweet desserts, he devoured them all, course after course, as if feasting could keep death at bay. Then, suddenly, in the middle of the meal, he collapsed. His heart, strained by years of indulgence, gave out. The last king of Egypt died not in a palace or on a battlefield, but at a dining table, his crown long lost, his legacy reduced to whispers of scandal. He was only 45 years old. Farouk left behind no monuments, no victories, no golden age. His story is not one of glory but of waste. He had been given everything: youth, wealth, power, the love of his people, and he squandered it all in pursuit of lust. He might have been a reformer, a modernizer, a leader to carry Egypt into greatness. Instead, he drowned in his own appetites. His reign ended not with triumph but with shame, and his dynasty crumbled with him. Number 3. King Farouk of Egypt, the 10th ruler of the Muhammad Ali dynasty, will forever be remembered, not as a savior, but as a warning. His story stands as proof that lust, when unchecked, consumes not only the man who carries it, but the throne he sits upon, the kingdom he rules, and the dreams of the people who once believed in him. Number 2. Henry VIII, the second Tudor King of England. Henry VIII of England, born on the 28th of June, 1491, entered the world as the second son of Henry VII, the founder of the Tudor dynasty. He was never meant to be king. That role belonged to his elder brother, Arthur. Yet fate, as so often in history, turned unexpectedly. When Arthur died young in 1502, Henry, still a boy, suddenly found himself heir to the throne of England. 7 years later, in 1509, he became the second Tudor king, and at first his reign seemed to herald a golden age. The young king was everything a Renaissance monarch should be. He was tall, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a commanding presence. His hair was a burnished red, his eyes sharp, his smile charming. He excelled at jousting, hunting, music, and poetry. He could converse in several languages, debate theology with priests, and perform on the lute for noble ladies. To his subjects, he seemed a prince out of legend, destined to lead England into glory. But beneath the golden exterior was a restless spirit consumed by appetites. Henry loved feasting, tournaments, and the thrill of conquest. More than anything, he loved women. His reign would not be remembered for victories on the battlefield or treaties signed in marble halls, but for his endless pursuit of wives, mistresses, and heirs. His lust, coupled with his ruthless will, reshaped England forever. When Henry took the throne, he married Catherine of Aragon, the widow of his late brother. Catherine was a Spanish princess, the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, and the match tied England to one of the most powerful royal families in Europe. At first, theirs was a genuine partnership. Catherine was devout, intelligent, and strong-willed. She gave Henry a daughter, Mary, but no surviving sons. In a world where dynasties lived or died on the birth of male heirs, this became a wound that festered inside Henry's mind. As the years passed and Catherine grew older, Henry's eyes wandered. In the glittering court of Whitehall and Greenwich, surrounded by ladies-in-waiting and ambitious noble families, the king found endless temptation. He indulged in affairs, but none captured his heart like Anne Boleyn. Anne was not the most beautiful woman in the court, but she was clever, witty, and refused to be merely another mistress. She demanded more: a crown, legitimacy, and a place beside him as queen. Henry was consumed. His lust for Anne was more than physical. It was obsessive, overwhelming. He showered her with letters, gifts, and promises. Yet Catherine remained queen, and the Pope in Rome refused to annul the marriage. Henry's frustration grew into fury. In his obsession to possess Anne, he defied the greatest authority in Christendom. He tore England away from the Catholic Church, declared himself supreme head of the Church of England, and dissolved the monasteries. The king's lust had not only upended his marriage but had changed the spiritual life of his kingdom forever. Anne was crowned queen in 1533, and for a time Henry seemed intoxicated with triumph. Yet Anne, like Catherine, could not give him a surviving son. She bore a daughter, Elizabeth, but miscarriages and disappointment followed. Henry's passion turned to suspicion. He accused Anne of infidelity, of adultery with courtiers, even of incest with her own brother. In May of 1536, she was tried and executed at the Tower of London, her head severed by a French swordsman. The woman for whom Henry had risked everything died as a criminal, her body dumped in an unmarked grave. This pattern would repeat again and again. Jane Seymour, his third wife, gave him the son he longed for, Edward, in 1537, but died days later. Henry mourned her sincerely, calling her his true queen, yet he moved on quickly. His fourth marriage to Anne of Cleves was arranged for political alliance. When she arrived in England, Henry found her unattractive and mocked her as the Flanders mare. He discarded her within 6 months, humiliating her and nullifying the union. His fifth wife, Catherine Howard, was a teenager, vibrant and playful, and Henry, now middle-aged and swollen with weight, pursued her with reckless passion. Yet Catherine was accused of adultery, and like Anne before her, she met the executioner's blade at the Tower. Henry's final wife, Catherine Parr, was more caretaker than consort, tending to the aging, obese king until his death. She alone survived. Henry's lust destroyed more than queens. It poisoned his court with fear. Ministers and nobles trembled, for they knew passion could turn to rage in an instant. Those who failed him met the axe. Even Thomas More, once his friend and advisor, was executed for refusing to acknowledge Henry's supremacy over the church. His court became a stage where loyalty was demanded, suspicion was constant, and the king's appetites dictated life and death. Beyond the women, Henry indulged in endless feasting. In his youth, he was athletic, but after a jousting accident left his leg permanently injured, he grew increasingly sedentary. His once powerful frame ballooned into obesity. By his later years, he weighed over 300 pounds. His leg ulcer festered, his body reeked, and he required a mechanical device to be lifted onto his horse. Yet even as his health decayed, his lust did not fade. He still demanded the devotion of women, the loyalty of courtiers, and the obedience of his subjects. The king who had once charmed Europe became a terrifying figure, unpredictable and merciless. Foreign ambassadors reported his temper, his cruelty, and his gluttony. His wives lived in fear, his subjects in dread, and his reputation spread across Europe as a monarch ruled as much by desire as by power. On the 28th of January, 1547, Henry died at Whitehall Palace. He was 55 years old, broken, bloated, and consumed by disease. He left behind 3 children, Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward, each from different mothers, each destined to rule in turn. Their reigns would shape the future of England, but they carried the scars of their father's legacy, a legacy built on lust, ambition, and cruelty. Henry VIII remains one of the most infamous monarchs in history, not only because of his 6 wives, but because his desires reshaped a nation. His lust destroyed marriages, toppled queens, severed England from Rome, and drenched the land in blood. He stands as proof that lust, when joined with power, can alter the course of history itself. Number 2. Henry VIII, the second Tudor King of England, will forever be remembered as a ruler whose passions consumed his wives, his court, and even his country. Number 1. Caligula, the third Roman emperor. In the year 37 after Christ, Rome witnessed the rise of a young emperor whose name would be etched into history, not for military triumphs or wise governance, but for madness, cruelty, and above all, lust. His name was Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, but the world remembers him by a cruel nickname, Caligula, meaning little boots, a moniker he earned as a boy following his father's soldiers in miniature armor. At first, his reign inspired hope. He was the son of Germanicus, a beloved general adored by the legions, and the people believed he would restore dignity and strength to the empire after the grim rule of Tiberius. When Caligula took the throne as the third emperor of Rome, the city erupted in joy. Temples were filled with sacrifices of thanksgiving, coins were struck with his image, and senators rushed to flatter the young ruler. For a brief moment, Rome dreamed of a golden age, but beneath the surface of charm and youth lay a darkness no one could contain. Caligula's reign, lasting less than 4 years, became a carnival of excess and depravity. His lust, mingled with cruelty, turned the empire's most sacred halls into theatres of debauchery. Where other rulers sought glory on the battlefield, or wisdom in law, Caligula sought pleasure, spectacle, and humiliation. His story is the story of lust unchained, lust that consumed not only the man but the empire that suffered under him. From the earliest days of his rule, Caligula displayed an appetite that shocked Rome's elite. Banquets became scenes of unrestrained indulgence. Senators and nobles were summoned to feasts that stretched long into the night, where the emperor reclined on gilded couches, surrounded by courtesans, musicians, and slaves trained to obey his every desire. The aroma of roasted meats mingled with incense as dancers performed, their bodies draped in little more than jewels, while Caligula drank heavily and mocked the guests he had summoned. Yet the food and drink were only preludes. The true entertainment was the emperor himself, commanding wives and daughters of Rome's nobility to serve him, not as honored guests, but as prostitutes. It was said that Caligula would wander among the tables, choosing a woman at will, leading her away as her husband sat powerless, forced to pretend amusement while his pride was crushed. When the pair returned, Caligula often described in detail what had occurred, mocking the humiliated husband in front of the entire gathering. To him, lust was not simply desire, it was domination, a demonstration of absolute power over bodies, marriages, and honor. The emperor's appetite did not stop with the noble families of Rome. He established a brothel within the imperial palace itself, staffed not by common courtesans but by the wives and daughters of senators, ordered to sell themselves to anyone the emperor permitted. Patrons were charged heavy fees, which Caligula pocketed, laughing as he turned the empire's proudest households into playthings. Sacred halls became dens of lust, and the boundaries between state and vice vanished. Even more shocking were the whispers of his relations with his own sisters. Ancient historians wrote that Caligula treated his sisters not as family but as lovers, especially his youngest, Drusilla. She was paraded through the city as if she were empress, her presence at his side constant, her status elevated above all others. When she died suddenly, Caligula was devastated. He ordered the empire into mourning as though a goddess had perished. He deified her, erecting temples in her honor, and rumors spread that his grief was not that of a brother, but of a man who had lost his greatest passion. Caligula's lust for spectacle extended beyond the walls of Rome. He ordered the construction of a floating bridge across the Bay of Baiae, stretching for miles over the water. This was not a feat of engineering for trade or war, but a colossal stage for his desires. He rode across it in golden armor, declaring himself greater than Alexander the Great. At night, tents filled the bridge, echoing with music, laughter, and cries of pleasure, as courtesans and nobles indulged in orgies that blurred the line between festival and sacrilege. His obsession with godhood intensified his depravity. Caligula declared himself a living god, demanding worship in temples that once honored Jupiter and Apollo. Statues of himself were erected, sacrifices made in his name, and priests ordered to bow before him. But his divinity was not limited to power, it was expressed through lust. Vestal virgins, sworn to eternal chastity, were said to have been forced into his bed. Sacred vows, ancient traditions, nothing was beyond his reach. The emperor's desires became the law of the empire, and all who lived in Rome trembled before them. His cruelty fused with his lust in terrifying ways. Caligula delighted in forcing couples to copulate before him, mocking them as they obeyed, and at times ordering executions in the midst of pleasure, as if to savor the clash of ecstasy and death. He viewed life and love as performances for his amusement, stripping dignity from those who served him. Senators who once dreamed of political influence became actors in his grotesque theater, their wives and daughters reduced to props. Was Caligula mad, or was he deliberate? Historians have debated for centuries. Some believed illness, perhaps epilepsy, or the lingering effects of a near-fatal sickness early in his reign, had unhinged his mind. Others argued his excesses were calculated, designed to terrify Rome's elite into submission. Whatever the truth, the effect was undeniable. His court became a place of dread. Citizens whispered stories too scandalous to believe, yet too consistent to dismiss. Soldiers grumbled that their emperor mocked their loyalty, seducing their wives and boasting of his conquests. Ordinary Romans, once hopeful, now recoiled from a ruler who treated their traditions as jokes and their families as toys. But lust, unchecked, breeds enemies. In January of the year 41 after Christ, after less than 4 years on the throne, Caligula was cut down by his own guards. As he left the theatre through a narrow passage, blades struck him again and again. The emperor who had declared himself a god cried out in pain, bleeding on the floor like any mortal man. His body was discarded, trampled, and buried hastily. His reign ended not with triumph, but with disgrace. For Rome, his death was both relief and humiliation. The empire had endured a ruler who turned its throne into a brothel, its sacred temples into stages of lust, and its nobility into objects of ridicule. Caligula's short reign burned like a torch, dazzling, scandalous, unforgettable, and destructive. He left behind no victories, no reforms, no monuments of greatness. What he left was legend, the legend of lust, unrestrained, of desire wielded as a weapon, of a man who mistook pleasure for power. Number 1. Caligula, the third Roman emperor, remains to this day a name synonymous with depravity. His story is not one of love, but of lust, not of greatness, but of indulgence. He stands as the ultimate warning that when absolute power is married to unbridled desire, the result is not glory but ruin.